So what's your thinking when it comes to confidentiality?
I go first to what is the contract between the parties. So the arrangement might be just one-on-one supervision or coaching, typically in a private context. And you would discuss with that client what the boundaries of the confidentiality are. And I think that applies differently to different practitioners, and depending on what country you live in, how you're protected by law, what legal obligations you do have to break the confidentiality. And around going to supervision, if you're a coach or a supervisor, that you will be talking about the case, but you're talking about it in a mode that respects the confidentiality. So you'll typically be talking about the nature of the relationship as opposed to anything that identifies the client or their circumstances. I mean, because that's what supervision's about. It's not about coaching the topic. It's about coaching how you react and want to respond to the topic.
Yeah. There was something that was really coming with quite a bit more clarity recently about that distinction of like what, in my experience of group supervision in mind, why has confidentiality never really been a big concern? And my sense there is that because there's enough contracting done up front, and also the focus of the supervision is on the practitioner's experience of it. It's not, so it's looking at the systemic stuff that's at play, the psychological stuff that's at play, and eventually what's the practitioner's interventions, how are they evolving. And it's I think sometimes coaches can get a bit anxious about the confidentiality because there's a misunderstanding of what supervision is. And it's like this, or I'm going to go and ask somebody that's more experienced to help me coach my client.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that's not it.
Wow. I've never, as obvious as that is, I've never made that connection before. And I think it's so important, because if people have a misconception about supervision, in terms of what it is, and believe that it may threaten confidentiality, then that's very limiting.
Yeah, very much so.
Limiting in that they're not going to be able to talk about the experiences of their practice or working with clients or an organization, and they're not going to be able to process that.
Yeah, and it's a really sticky place. It can start to become quite heavily laden with other limiting beliefs. So it just becomes a bigger and heavier wheel to try and turn, when actually it's not about that stuff. It's about looking at what's really happening. Some of the questions that I love to keep in mind, of look on my own professional reflection, and I encourage my clients to use this, is look at where's my personal stuff getting hooked. So where might I get resonance with my clients' topics, that feeling like, oh no, I know this one, or oh, I know what's good for them. That's my stuff getting hooked. Or where am I working with a client and noticing afterwards, I'm not getting around to doing this thing that I think I should be doing as a coach with this client. but I don't seem to be getting around to that. So what's getting in the way there? So it's the focus is on me as a practitioner, or the focus is on the practitioner and how they're showing up to be of most value to their clients.
Mm. And I think you've alluded to it, but I just want to make it explicit that, what you've said is that some of the challenges that come up for the practitioner are because of the practitioner's own stuff. And the bit I wanted to make explicit was some of the challenges that come up for the practitioner are because of the dynamic that the client is involved in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the practitioner might get involved in like a drama triangle or some other kind of dynamic.
Yeah. And it's funny how the invitation could come from either or both people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, I forget the language in that, my stuff versus the client stuff being projected onto the dynamic. So I could, well, as a practitioner could have a nurturing nature and could easily try and invite the client to come into a drama triangle and be rescued by them. Or the other side is that the client could be inviting the practitioner to rescue or persecute or something like that on the drama triangle. So that supervision is a wonderful place to to figure out, what is this? Is this my stuff? Is it their stuff? And with that, what do I need to do with that? How do I show up and stay in the here and now and not get tricked into a there and then with them?
In my mind, I'm just relating this back to confidentiality. And I don't think that our clients, especially in coaching, necessarily need to know all of these details about why we as practitioners are obliged to process this stuff through supervision. But if we don't process it, we're not going to be effective for those clients because of the emergence of these dynamics and our awareness of them. And our ability to transcend our personal stuff or the dynamic and respond to it effectively. So the clients just need to know that we partake in a process called supervision that enables us to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So what more needs to be said now about confidentiality?
I'm just thinking about context we haven't covered yet, which is, I think, typically encountered in organizations where there'll be multiple parties to the coaching intervention. So there'll be the person who receives the coaching. HR is likely to be one party. The client, i.e. the person receiving the coaching, may have a supervisor in an organizational context, like their direct report, or the person they report directly to, rather. And I don't know, one thing I've heard happening quite a lot is that the client's boss wants to know what's going on in the coaching. And I think that's natural human curiosity, but it has great potential for disaster and sabotaging the entire process, which is going to negatively impact the organization at the end of the day. So being very clear about what those boundaries are with those parties, and each of them knows what the other one's expectations around confidentiality are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so important that stuff does get covered, even though at times there can be quite a high pressure of pace to get into the work. But it's so important because that stuff is part of the work.
Welcome back. Okay, so where were we? I think we were talking about confidentiality or something like that.
Something like that. That rings a faint bell.
And we talked about organizational contexts.
Were we up to the point of saying that's how important it is to have that groundwork in place in organizational context?
Yeah. So off screen, you mentioned how we might work with confidentiality. Should we go there?
Yeah. Okay. I suppose some of the easiest things to cover is that in our group supervisions, the sessions aren't recorded, so that ensures that there isn't some kind of record somewhere hiding in the clouds or something like that. So knowing that the sessions that are live are for that moment only. Yeah, I suppose then what was coming to my mind now is that in the model of contracting in transactional analysis, so the first level being administrative, second level being professional, and then the third level being psychological. So at those top level, the easiest stuff, the administrative stuff, is that the sessions aren't recorded. They're, I suppose, is time bound something to do with confidentiality? I suppose there's time's one of the easiest boundaries to control, which helps create safety and structure. Yeah, what comes to your mind?
I think that's a very useful model to use. And relating it back to multi-party contracts, on the professional level, having an explicit agreement around what information is shared with whom and what they may and may not do with that information. And noting about the TA model of contracting that the procedural and professional aspects are explicit, so they usually on a piece of paper or at least verbally discussed. And the psychological is implicit, so it's the transference and the counter-transference, amongst many others. And the discussion on confidentiality in the contracting phase will have an impact on how the individual psychologically engage with the coaching or the supervision. And I think it's important to discuss that. So what are people's expectations? How can the coaching or the supervision work best for them? What are their desires around confidentiality? And also where confidentiality has some more structure, like there's information that the organization wants from the process, how to best work within the bounds of that.
Yeah. So, and that then starts to, it's the contracting isn't linear. Then there's a cyclical nature in it, because once you get to understand more of the psychological stuff, then bringing it back into the roles and responsibilities of the professional stuff. So if there is an agreed reporting structure, um, how to take cognizance of that, the psychological need back into that reporting structure, which would be in the professional space.
Beautifully put. Yeah. So it's a little bit more complex than just saying these sessions are private, especially in multi-party contracts.
Yeah, I've had I suppose it was comical because there was a good groundwork in place, experience, where I was asked to coach two people, individually, that reported into the same manager, and the manager was essentially sending them to coaching. So we had a round table with everybody around it to discuss, and we did all that lovely groundwork. And then there was this point where the one day the manager, just by chance, was kind of walking at my shoulder and then decided to have a conversation, try to have a conversation with me about one of them. And because we had that structure in place, I could just very comfortably put a pause to the conversation and say, "This, remember what we discussed before? This is the kind of thing that we were talking about then."
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting how that comes up. It can put one in quite an awkward space. So
Yeah.
When you said quite comfortably, my assumption is that the initial explicit contracting around confidentiality at the beginning of the process really helped you when something came up down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's part of that process of, it's you can understand the structure of something, but then there's nuance around it, and it's only through experience that you get to really color in what the nuance is. But having the structure in place is it creates a lot of safety.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, I'm not sure if this is what your intent was, is that through experience you learn the nuances.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that is true. And also through group supervision, you can really learn through other people's experience.
Yeah. 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 So I think, yeah, I love that addition. It's so in each context, the role players can take some time to learn how to make use of the structure, but then over time you can distill wisdom from each of your engagements to update the contract. But then what you said now is that in that group environment, you get to learn about context that you haven't even been exposed to yet, or you haven't even you didn't even think would exist. And that really is such a wonderful value add of group work.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the benefits that I think one is less likely to encounter in one-on-one supervision.
Yeah.
So we're ready to wrap this one up, or is there more?
I was wondering if there's just something to add around one-off groups and how contracting might be different in that versus a group that's contracted to work together for a period of or a number of sessions.
Yeah, do you already have some thinking on that?
The thing that immediately came to mind was that in a group that's contracting to work together for a series of sessions, there would be a high intensity of contracting confidentiality in the beginning, and then it's almost on an ad hoc basis or on a needs basis, the confidentiality gets sort of updated or tweaked. If we come across something that was unforeseen in the beginning, what I've had a couple of times is in groups, somebody might have a potential connection. So they might need to do a piece of updating confidentiality for that piece that they're bringing, so that the other person that might have a connection, a professional connection or a social connection, can check if it's safe enough to do that work in that space. But the key thing there was that there's a high intensity in the beginning, and then it's on a needs basis. It gets updated in an ongoing group, versus when there's a new group each time, that there will always be confidentiality contracting at the beginning.
So what are the implications of that on the robustness of the contracting in once-off groups? You have to really get it right.
Well, that really feels like it's hooking my Be Perfect.
No, that's why I said it. I mean, not to hook you, but because it hooks mine as well.
Yeah. I think the thing here is to trust that the practitioner has the ability to work ethically, and that the participants are themselves ethical practitioners. So we will have a discussion in the beginning around confidentiality that starts to create the framework. And on those one-off sessions, it's almost like that in the group that is contracted to work in a series will have a high intensity in the beginning, and then update on a needs basis. That kind of happens on a shorter timeline in a one-off as well. So there's something that's said in the beginning to talk about confidentiality, and then as each person brings in their topic or piece of work, a check-in again, then what's needed to keep it safe.
I'm thinking that my statement that hooked us could hook other people, or the process of contracting. This is a better way of saying it. The process of contracting in a once-off group will almost certainly be influenced by the individual's drivers who are in that group. So a hurry up person might not want to spend much time on contracting and lose the important detail, and the Be Perfect person might get stuck in the detail and spend too much time there, not then giving time to the rest of the group or the process. And the other thing that came up for me was, at least you mentioned, I think your word was assumption, or assuming that people will respect the confidentiality, or something around that. And a concern I had was, what assumptions are we making about people's training and their ethical mindedness?
Mm.
And I think it's safest to assume that people can think in the moment in the contracting, but that they don't necessarily have the awareness or the training yet. So to really explicitly contract. Because I've just come across so many situations where basic stuff in coaching processes is missed, not inadvertently, but just because of lack of training, lack of awareness. So, and I really see this as congruent with supervision, because it's the process of contracting itself is a learning moment.
Yeah.
And it models well what coaches can take through to their own practice.
Yeah. It's not the boxes to tick before the real stuff.
Lovely way of putting it, yeah.
It is real.
It's integral to the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one way of getting around that for once off work is to have some kind of written material or even a chemistry session beforehand with potential interested parties around confidentiality, so that they enter into the group with some awareness already.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that came to mind is a well-maintained, frequently asked questions. So that, and it's not to try and use an FAQ to answer everything, but to elevate awareness of what to be curious about and questioning about. So that when you do have those chemistry conversations, you've got somebody that's at a heightened level compared to when you first come across you and your work. It becomes a tool, not a. No, maybe that's the wrong word. I'm gonna try and be fancy words. Keep it simple.
Come on, be fancy.
No. Next time.
Okay. I can't wait for next time then.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is that enough for now?
I think so. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.